All right. Well, as a language professor, I think perhaps my biggest challenge is to convince my students to reframe the way that they view the task of learning a language from one in which there's one right way to say any particular thing to one in which there are multiple possible ways to express their ideas. Now, to be honest, it's a little difficult because in the United States, the deck is sort of stacked against me. After all, we've got this tremendous amount of variation, and yet at the same time, most of the discourse around language is about correct, right? Correct grammar, correct pronunciation. Don't use the word y'all. Don't end the sentence in a preposition. But these notions of right and wrong are really more about social dynamics than they are about linguistics. Now, in my research, I deal with this standard language ideology quite a bit. I'm a scholar of the linguistic history of Arabic, and my work these days centers quite a bit on texts written by Jews and Christians in the early Islamic period. So Christians actually adopted Arabic as a literary language quite early in the Islamic period, and they started translating texts, including the Bible. They wrote a number of other works, but Christian Arabic differs so significantly from the presumed standard, classical Arabic, that scholars have treated it as just bad Arabic, wrong. But why is that? Well, the answer actually goes back to the early Islamic period in Iraq, where a group of scholars wanted to document and understand the language of some prestigious poetry and also of the Quran. And their remarks became the basis for what we call classical Arabic, which eventually was taken to be the correct form of Arabic. These same scholars wrote histories of Arabic, and according to them, in the pre-Islamic period, everyone in Arabia spoke the same thing, namely classical Arabic. They all spoke good Arabic, and it's only with the spread of Islam, non-Arabic speakers tried to learn, but they couldn't, and they produced bad Arabic. So, somewhat surprisingly, perhaps, this story, this narrative, has been the dominant narrative really until very recently. And so as scholars have approached texts like Christian Arabic that don't comport with classical Arabic norms, they assume, again, this is just bad Arabic. They can't produce good Arabic. But is this an accurate picture of Arabic's history? Well, that question has interested me and others, and a group of scholars, you can see me here in northeastern Jordan with a team from Leiden University, repping the brand. We've been very interested in understanding, so we've been carrying out surveys across the region looking for pre-Islamic language and other archaeological remains. So what have we found? Literally hundreds of thousands of inscriptions from across the region, never before documented. Many of these are in Arabic, but not all. If you'll notice on the right, there are inscriptions that are written by Christians in the pre-Islamic period, adorned with crosses, and they use a peculiar form of the word for God, only used by Christians. Now, these inscriptions are real game changers. First, they reveal that Arabia was actually incredibly linguistically diverse. Not only was Arabic not the only language spoken and written in the pre-Islamic period, it's only one of about a dozen, and many of these inscriptions are bi- and even trilingual. So we've got real cosmopolitanism linguistically. But perhaps the most significant for our purposes is that of all the language inscriptions we've discovered heretofore, classical Arabic is not attested at all. Pre-Islamic Arabic was completely different than what we think it was. And this is, of course, changing the way we interpret everything, including the Quran. The Quran, which is the holy text of Islam, as I mentioned, was a base for the scholars who canonized classical Arabic. But the principles and the traditions by which they read the Quran developed much later, over a century after the life of Muhammad, and in southern Iraq, which is far from his Western Arabian homeland. So that top layer is actually what the Quran looked like when it was written, and this bottom layer is the vowels that were applied much later. Now, most of the time, scholars have approached that top layer through the lens of the bottom layer. But now we are contextualizing the top layer with the pre-Islamic material we have and finding that the Quran actually looks very different than traditionally thought. So thanks to all of these discoveries, we're in a much better position to understand and contextualize the activity of the scholars in the early Islamic period. And while classical Arabic was certainly prestigious in southern Iraq, in places like Palestine and even Arabia, other varieties were being used. So now, coming to Christian Arabic again, there's no longer any reason to assume that these scribes were trying and simply failing to produce good or correct Arabic. In fact, there's a high likelihood that's definitely not what they were trying to do. But to understand what they were trying to do, We have to take them seriously and not impose later norms. And so my research is dedicated to that. I've been looking at gospel manuscripts, and in one recent study, for example, I took 24 different gospel manuscripts, tracked the variation, and identified distinct grammatical and scribal traditions heretofore unrecognized. But I also wanted to see what of what I was finding was shared among non-Christians. And so I started looking at early Quranic manuscripts again, the ones with vowels but before classical Arabic became dominant. Now, these have not been given much attention because they differ from classical Arabic. But I started finding some really interesting things, including lots and lots of parallels between the ways Christians were writing and reading the Gospels and the ways in which the Muslims were reading the Quran. And in fact, in many cases, Christians and Muslims in the same location shared more than either did with co-religionists elsewhere. But over time, this variety of Arabic was suppressed and eventually forgotten in the Muslim tradition because there was a strong centralized effort to standardize and narrow the range of possible readings of the Quran. But no such central ideology developed among Christians, and so these practices continued among them for much longer. So kind of coming back full circle, again, by avoiding this idea that there's one thing that's right and everybody is either doing it right or wrong and taking them seriously, not only do we gain serious insight and significant insight into the communities themselves and how they were writing, but also great insight into how Jews, Christians, and Muslims interacted in the Islamic period. Thank you very much.